Evan had always been an ordinary person living an ordinary life. He woke up each morning to the sound of an alarm clock that seemed louder than it needed to be, drank the same coffee, and walked the same road to the same job. Yet, somewhere deep inside, there was a restlessness he could not explain, a quiet voice that kept whispering that he was meant for something more. When he was a child, he would lie on the roof of his parents' small house and look up at the stars. He didn't know the names of constellations, but he loved the idea that every tiny light in the sky was a dream waiting to be touched. He had promised himself back then that one day he would do something meaningful, something that would make people remember his name. But years passed, and like so many others, his dream slowly faded beneath the weight of practicality and routine. He worked as a clerk in a shipping company. Numbers, invoices, shipments, nothing about it made him feel alive. Still, he told himself it was enough. Everyone needed stability. Everyone needed to be realistic. Dreaming, he thought, was for people with luck or money or talent. He had none of those. Or at least, that's what he believed. One afternoon, as he sat at his desk entering data into a spreadsheet, he looked out the window and saw a group of children flying paper planes. For a moment, he remembered the feeling of being a boy with paper dreams, chasing the sky. Something inside him ached. That night, for the first time in years, he couldn't sleep. The question that had followed him since childhood returned: what if he could do more than just exist? But the next morning came, and with it came the noise of alarms, deadlines, and bills. Dreams, he told himself, could wait. They always could. Then, one Monday morning, his manager called him in. The office smelled of coffee and toner, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. His manager's tone was polite but distant. There were budget cuts. Positions were being eliminated. Evan's name was on the list. He nodded, pretending to understand, though his mind had already gone blank. Within an hour, his desk was empty, his belongings packed into a cardboard box. He walked out of the building into a city that looked exactly the same but felt completely different. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't know what to do next. He walked for hours. It started to rain. The city blurred behind a curtain of water, and he didn't bother to open his umbrella. He stopped at a small park, sat on a bench, and watched the raindrops hit the puddles. He thought about the children with their paper planes, about the boy he used to be, and he wondered when exactly he had stopped believing. When he finally went home, drenched and exhausted, he opened a drawer searching for a towel and found something else instead, an old sketchbook. It was dusty, the pages yellowing, the corners curled. Inside were drawings from his teenage years, sketches of buildings, bridges, mechanical designs. He had once dreamed of becoming an architect, of creating things that would last longer than a lifetime. He stared at the pages, his heart tightening. He had forgotten how much he loved to draw. That night he picked up a pencil, awkwardly at first, and began to sketch again. Lines turned into shapes, shapes into structures, and soon he was lost in the world of his imagination. For the first time in years, time disappeared. When he finally looked up, dawn was spilling light through the window. His table was covered with sketches. His hand ached, but he felt alive. Something small had shifted. In the morning, he made a decision, not a grand declaration, but a quiet promise to himself. He would give his dream one more chance. He spent the next week applying for jobs in design firms, most of which ignored him. His portfolio was outdated, his experience irrelevant. Each rejection email felt like a reminder that he was chasing something impossible. Yet, every night, he drew. The more he drew, the more he remembered the feeling of being that boy on the roof, believing the stars were close enough to reach. One evening, a message appeared in his inbox. It was from a small independent architectural studio. They had seen his drawings online and wanted to meet him. He almost didn't go. A part of him whispered that it would only end in disappointment. But another part, the part that had quietly reawakened, told him to try. The studio was tucked away in a narrow street filled with cafes and bookstores. Inside, the walls were lined with models and blueprints. The owner, a woman named Clara, greeted him warmly. She had silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen everything but still believed in possibility. She looked through his sketches for a long time without speaking. Finally, she said, "You have an eye for structure. These lines tell stories." Evan felt a lump in his throat. He hadn't realized how badly he needed to hear that. Clara continued, "We can't pay much, but we're working on a community housing project. I could use someone who still draws with heart." He nodded quickly, afraid that if he hesitated, the moment would vanish. The next months were difficult. The work was demanding, and his savings were running out. There were nights he went to bed hungry and mornings when he questioned everything. Yet, every time he saw one of his designs take shape on a screen or a page, he felt that spark again. Still, the old fear lingered. What if it all ended again? What if he failed? Clara noticed his hesitation one day and said, "Evan, dreams are like blueprints. They don't build themselves. But they give you the shape of what could be. The rest is up to your courage." He thought about that for a long time. Courage. That was something he hadn't given himself credit for. He had survived losing his job, his confidence, and almost his purpose, and yet he was still standing. Maybe courage wasn't about being fearless. Maybe it was about continuing despite fear. Weeks turned into months. The project grew. Evan's designs became central to the studio's new proposal, a sustainable housing model that used recycled materials and natural energy. When they presented it to the city council, the response was mixed. Some loved it. Some laughed at it. That night, he couldn't sleep. He remembered every failure, every rejection, every doubt. The boy who dreamed of stars had become a man afraid of his own light. But as dawn approached, something inside him settled. He realized that belief wasn't about knowing the outcome. It was about trusting the journey. The next morning, he walked into the studio, smiled at Clara, and said, "Let's try again. Let's make it better." And they did. The revised design was stronger, more practical, yet still beautiful. When it was presented again, it was approved. For the first time, one of Evan's dreams began to take physical form. Standing at the construction site months later, watching the foundation being laid, he felt a deep, quiet pride. It wasn't the kind of triumph movies are made of. It was better. It was real. He realized that dreams don't always announce themselves with thunder and applause. Sometimes they arrive in silence, like sunrise, slow, steady, inevitable. The first time Evan saw his design come to life, he felt something awaken inside him that no promotion or paycheck could ever have given. The building was modest, a cluster of small eco-homes on the city's edge, but when sunlight hit the new glass windows, It glowed like proof that imagination could become matter. He stood there long after the workers left, walking slowly through the half-finished corridors. Every wall, every line, every angle carried a piece of his old sketchbook, and that realization filled him with quiet awe. He touched the rough surface of a pillar and whispered, "So this is what a dream feels like when it starts breathing." Clara congratulated him warmly. She told him he had a gift not just for design but for listening, to materials, to people, to possibilities. Yet she also warned him, success doesn't protect you from fear, sometimes it attracts more of it. He didn't understand then, but he soon would. After the project's success, larger firms began to notice the little studio. One morning an email arrived from a prestigious architectural company offering a collaboration on a landmark design, a cultural center that would stand in the heart of the capital. It was the kind of opportunity architects waited their whole lives for. Clara looked at him across her desk. "You're the youngest here," she said. "You can lead this concept. Show them what we can do." The words filled him with pride and panic in equal measure. Led? Him? He wanted to believe he was ready, yet a familiar tremor ran through his chest. Still, he accepted. Dreams, he reminded himself, are not meant to make you comfortable. The following months blurred into long nights. He lived inside his designs. Papers and models piled on his table like a small city. Sometimes he forgot to eat, sometimes he forgot what day it was. His mind raced with ideas, sweeping curves, open atriums, spaces filled with light. He wanted to build something that would remind people that imagination was as important as air. But dreams demand balance, and balance was what he lost first. Deadlines crept closer. The investors questioned every creative risk. Clara advised compromise, but he resisted. "If we change everything they ask for, it won't mean anything," he argued. Dreams can't be built by fear. She admired his fire but feared he would burn himself out. Tension grew between inspiration and practicality, between art and budget. One night, after 48 sleepless hours, he stared at his latest model and realized the design didn't work. The structure was unstable. Weeks of effort dissolved before his eyes. He felt the old whisper of failure crawling back, "You've gone too far. You're not good enough for this stage." He dropped into his chair, exhausted. For the first time since he'd joined the studio, he thought about quitting. Yet something inside him refused to let go. He remembered the park bench, the rain, the boy with the paper plane. He realized he couldn't stop halfway up the mountain because the air had grown thin. He pushed the model aside and opened a blank page. This time he worked slower, calmer, more honest. He thought less about impressing others and more about the people who would one day walk through the building's halls. Bit by bit, a new design emerged, simpler, lighter, stronger. When he presented it, the room was silent. Then one of the senior architects nodded and said, "This one feels alive." The project was approved for construction. Evan smiled, but inside he understood that the real victory wasn't the approval. It was rediscovering faith when everything had gone wrong. Months turned into years. The cultural center grew floor by floor, each stage bringing new challenges, permits delayed, materials lost, arguments over cost. He had learned that chasing a dream was not a straight road, it was a spiral. You circled back to the same doubts, the same fears, until you learned what they were trying to teach. The day the final beam was lifted into place, he climbed to the highest level with the workers. The city stretched around them in every direction. The wind pressed against his face, cold and alive. Below, traffic moved like blood through the streets. He realized how small each person looked from here, yet how powerful a single idea could be. When the building opened to the public, crowds came. Children laughed in the echoing halls. Musicians performed in the amphitheater. Artists hung their work along the curved walls of glass and steel. Reporters called it a dream turned concrete. He smiled at the phrase because he knew how true it was. For a while, life was good, steady projects, recognition, comfort. He moved into a small apartment overlooking the river. People began to call him the dream architect. But somewhere in the middle of praise and stability, he noticed that the spark which once kept him awake at night had begun to dim. He wondered if success could also become a cage. Every project he took now felt like repetition, safe, profitable, predictable. He had stopped daring. The boy who had once looked at stars was now content drawing straight lines that pleased clients. One rainy evening, he returned home and saw the same children from his neighborhood running with paper planes. For a moment he stood in the doorway, watching the tiny shapes glide through the air, then fall, then rise again. He remembered how everything had begun, with a dream that made him forget fear. He felt ashamed of how far he had drifted from that feeling. The next morning, he told Clara he needed a break. She smiled knowingly. "Go," she said. Sometimes the best way to find a new dream is to let the old one rest. He traveled alone to the countryside where he had grown up. The house was smaller than he remembered, but the roof was the same. One night he climbed onto it again, lay back, and looked at the sky. The stars were still there, quiet, patient, endless. He realized then that dreams didn't belong to success or failure. They belonged to the part of him that refused to stop wondering. They were not destinations but directions. He thought of all the people who had lost their dreams because the world told them to be realistic. He wanted to tell them that reality is built by dreamers who dared not to listen. The next day, an idea formed, one he couldn't ignore. If dreams had power only when shared, perhaps it was time to help others build theirs. When he returned to the city, he resigned from the large firm and opened a small foundation inside the same studio where everything had started. He called it Blueprints for Tomorrow. The goal was simple: teach underprivileged students how to design, imagine, and believe. At first, only 3 students came. They were shy, uncertain, much like he had been. He showed them his first failed sketches, the ones with crooked lines and broken towers. He told them, dreams begin ugly. That's how you know they're real. Slowly, the class grew. The studio filled with laughter, arguments, ideas, mistakes. He spent long days guiding them, watching them discover the joy of creation. And with each young mind that lit up, he felt his own dream reborn in 100 different forms. One afternoon a girl named Nisha brought him a drawing of a playground designed to collect rainwater and feed nearby gardens. The design was rough, impossible by professional standards, but her eyes shone with belief. "Do you think it could work?" she asked. He looked at the paper and smiled. "If you believe in it, it's already working." In her excitement, he saw his younger self. He realized that the power of dreams was not in achieving them alone but in passing them forward, in proving through your life that imagination deserves space in this world. Months turned into years, and the small foundation slowly grew into a movement. More students arrived, drawn by curiosity first, then by conviction. They came from villages, crowded city schools, and forgotten neighborhoods. Some could barely afford notebooks. Evan taught them not only how to sketch and calculate but how to see. "Look at the space between things," he would say. "That's where ideas live." The studio walls were now covered with hundreds of drawings, dreams pinned like constellations. Some designs were wild, some childish, some breathtakingly original. Each sheet carried fingerprints of hope. He often stayed long after everyone left, walking slowly between the tables, touching the corners of papers as though they were small windows into tomorrow. One winter evening, Clara visited. Her hair was fully silver now, her movements slower, but her smile carried the same quiet fire. She looked around at the buzzing classroom and said, "You've built something I never could." Evan laughed softly. "You built me," he said, and she squeezed his hand. For a moment they stood there without speaking, two dreamers who had chosen to keep believing long after the world told them to stop. Soon after that visit, Clara fell ill. She spent her last months in the countryside, and Evan went to see her whenever he could. On his final visit, she took his hand and whispered, "You've given my dream a second life. Promise me you'll keep believing, even when the work feels endless." He promised. When she was gone, the foundation became his way of keeping that promise alive. Grief, he discovered, can either close you or carve you open. It carved him open. He poured everything he had into his students, into projects that reached far beyond architecture: solar lanterns for villages, tiny houses for flood victims, community gardens in crowded neighborhoods. The work was never glamorous, but it mattered. Every blueprint felt like a heartbeat. Then came an unexpected letter, an invitation from the International Design Council. One of Nish's early projects, the rain harvesting playground, had been nominated for a Youth Innovation Award. She was terrified to present it on a global stage, but Evan told her, "If a dream frightens you, it's because it's alive." At the ceremony, Nisha stumbled through her opening lines, then found her rhythm. She spoke of children playing in water that would one day feed trees, of small designs that could heal large wounds. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause. Evan, sitting in the back row, felt tears sting his eyes. Watching her on that stage, he realized his own dream had grown wings wider than he'd ever imagined. After the event, journalists wanted to interview him, calling him a mentor, a visionary. But he told them, "I'm just someone who refused to forget what it felt like to want more." The headline the next day read, "The architect who builds believers." Years later, when the city celebrated the 20th anniversary of the cultural center, the first great building of his career, they invited him to speak. Standing before the crowd, he looked at the shining glass walls that had once been drawings on a crumpled page. He spoke not about design or technology, but about the fragile force that had carried him there. "I was once an ordinary man who thought dreams were luxuries," he began. "Then life stripped everything away until dreaming was all I had left. Dreams do not belong to the lucky, they belong to the stubborn. They belong to those who keep working when no one is watching, to those who fall and rise and fall again, shaping the invisible until it becomes real." The audience was silent. He continued, "If you remember only one thing tonight, let it be this: the world moves forward because someone, somewhere, dares to imagine it better. Every bridge, every poem, every discovery began as a dream. So guard yours. Feed it. Share it. Because the moment you believe in it, You change more than your own life, you change the story of everyone who comes after you. When he stepped down from the stage, Nisha hugged him tightly. Around them, former students were laughing, exchanging ideas, planning projects. In their faces he saw the continuation of every sleepless night, every failure, every sketch that once seemed pointless. Later, walking alone along the river, he thought about the arc of his life. The city lights shimmered on the water like scattered stars. He remembered the roof of his childhood home, the boy staring upward, promising himself that he would one day touch the sky. He smiled. Perhaps he hadn't touched it yet, but he had helped others lift their eyes toward it. And maybe that was what the power of dreams truly meant, not to reach every star yourself, but to leave enough light behind so others can find their way. He went back to the studio, unlocked the door, and stood inside the quiet space. The tables were messy, the air smelled of paper and pencil shavings. On one corner lay his old sketchbook, the one that had started it all. He opened it to the first page, a crooked drawing of a building reaching upward. Beneath it, in faded handwriting, were the words he had once scribbled as a teenager, "One day this will be real." He added a new line beneath it, and it was. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent and alive. He closed the book, turned off the lights, and stepped into the night. The stars were faint behind the glow of buildings, but he could still see them. They had never gone anywhere, they had only been waiting for him to look up again. He walked home with an easy heart, knowing that tomorrow new dreams would be born, in classrooms, in alleyways, in every quiet mind brave enough to imagine. The power of dreams, he thought, is endless because it belongs to everyone willing to believe. And somewhere, far above the city, a single shooting star crossed the sky, brief, bright, and enough.